Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and today we're taking a deep dive into the topic of menopause with Lisa Boate. Lisa is a menopause consultant, a coach, and the host of Transforming 45 podcast, with a passion for guiding women through their midlife journey, especially during the challenging phases of empty nest and perimenopause and menopause. Lisa combines her expertise in education and coaching with a deep understanding of the emotional and physical aspects of menopause. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I can't stop talking about this topic. So the more places I have to talk about it, the happier I am. So thank you for having me today.
Well, that's so interesting. I'm not sure I've ever met anybody that couldn't stop talking about menopause.
Well, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I talk about a few other things too. However, it is top of mind often.
So I want to just jump right in because, at face value, most people probably, especially in the demographic that we target with our listener base, mostly people probably have an idea of what menopause and perimenopause is. But can you give us a little 101 on the difference or how they're truly defined so we can really make sure we've got them classified correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good and important question because there are lots of tropes, I'm going to use that word, out there around what menopause means or looks like, but it's a very surface understanding. So this conversation about what menopause actually is and the difference between menopause and perimenopause are really important, especially for, I actually have a friend who she said to me in the fall, she was like, Lisa, as soon as you say the words menopause or perimenopause, I just tune out. I'm not listening anymore, because she was not quite 40 at the time. So she was like, it has nothing to do with me. I don't need to know about it. And I was like, oh, sister, that's where you are missing some critical pieces of information. So yeah, thank you for this question. It's a really important place to start. So menopause itself happens once you haven't had a period for a full calendar year. So it is 12 months without a period. That is when you are said to be in full menopause, and then you enter into the post-menopause stage and phase. Prior to that time is actually perimenopause. So it is the time when estrogen and progesterone are fluctuating in your body, but you still may have a very regular period. And here is a piece of information that most people don't know, and that is that the perimenopause phase can last up to 10 years. So if we look at on average, and I'm probably going to say this many times during this interview, but every woman's experience is really different. So when we talk about benchmarks, they're exactly that, with a massive range on either side. So generally, benchmark women hit menopause in their late 40s, early 50s. So if you go back a decade from that,
It's early.
Yeah. It's like late 30s, early 40s. It's possible that you can be experiencing perimenopausal symptoms. And I can give you some of my own examples. So I also started menstruating really early. I was 11. So I have been having a regular cycle for a really long time. And I didn't realize that I was starting to have perimenopausal symptoms in probably my mid 40s, even into my early 40s, because it wasn't language I had ever heard. And I had I had this mystical idea of what menopause was. It was like, oh, your period stops. Great, fabulous. But there are so many other things that happen along the way. And so I was experiencing really, really heavy periods, lack of energy, an increased sense of anxiety, And that one often does not get tagged to perimenopause, but it absolutely can be. There are also states we experience in this phase of life because of often the intensity that we're experiencing, so they can go unnoticed. That's why information is key, because you don't just have to feel this way for the rest of your life, which is what the narrative has been. It's like, well, once you hit that, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And that is not the truth. And so that I know we'll get into that in this conversation today.
Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is one of the most, and again, we're going to generalize because
Yeah.
we have to have the conversation, right? So, what are some of the most common symptoms of menopause? And then what are some that may be surprising to folks?
Mm. So that's another great question. And the two I'm going to say that are most known, hot flushes and night sweats. Okay. So those two are what a lot of the stereotypes are made around.
Yeah.
And they happen, right? Like I have night sweats. I will never forget the first one that I had when I woke up in a lake of my own making and had no idea why this was happening. The important thing to know about those two symptoms, however, is that they are actually vasomotor events.
Dumb that down for
So
us
that
or
means,
for
yeah.
me.
And so vasomotor is your cardiovascular system. They're your heart acting in a way that is like knocking on your rib cage, going, there is something happening. So going to some of the main issues that people don't know about is that estrogen for women is a little bit of magic, chemistry magic anyway, in that it has protective factors for all of the systems in our bodies, for our digestive system, for the way our brains function, for our cardiovascular health. So tying back to hot flushes and night sweats and being vasomotor events, it is your cardiovascular's way of saying there's less estrogen here. There is less protection happening for this system. And we need to do some other things to protect it because that magic of estrogen is going away. And not knowing that piece of information is one of the reasons why cardiovascular disease is the number one premature death factor for women across the globe and in North America in particular.
Wow. So our body knows, it notices, it's giving us a warning to say there's something going on.
Yes.
So what do you do?
It's a great question. And that's where I'm going to go back to. It is totally different for every single woman. And that's why working with someone like me or another practitioner who is really skilled and knowledgeable in how menopause and perimenopause impacts the body is really important. Because a lot of the time when you go to your doctor and say, I'm having some of these symptoms, what's the answer?
It's normal. You should expect that.
Right. And I was talking to a colleague who said, just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal.
Yes.
And that was a really powerful statement.
Yes.
For me to hear and for us to remind ourselves, just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal.
Yes.
And so we don't have to accept that answer.
That is such a great phrase. And it reminds me also of a conversation that I was having with a friend just a couple weeks ago about some, I'll say, symptoms that we were both in common experiencing, and we both got that type of reaction from our doctor. So that's really interesting that you say, yeah, it can be common,
yes,
but it doesn't mean that it's A, should be happening, or B, something we have to live with.
Yeah. So there are sort of four main pillars that are really important in protecting our health, and they are stress management, sleep, nutrition, and movement. And they're the pillars of everything we know about wellness and well-being.
Yes. Yes.
And so I know. So they're not special or specific to menopause, which is why having these conversations with women like all the way through their lifespan is so important because and that's why perimenopause absolutely is relevant to any woman, regardless of what stage they're at. Because the earlier you start implementing those routines, the longer and more effective the outcomes are. Also, it's just easier to start a routine when you're not in a crisis.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the earlier you can start building those routines, the better. And it's never too late. So if you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and you start implementing a consistent movement routine, start really paying attention to what you're eating and drinking, they can have a significant difference. So I'll give you one really clear, specific one, and that is my night sweats increase significantly if I have alcohol the night before.
That's a clear correlation. Wow.
Yeah. And alcohol, it's a tough one, right? It's a tough conversation to have on lots of levels. And I'm never saying like never do anything ever again, right? Like we want to live. We want to enjoy living. And so if having a glass of wine is something you find enjoyable, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying pay attention and notice what happens.
Yeah.
Right. And then decide. And then you can make decisions from that point, right? Of like, how often do I want to do this? When is it worth it? When is it not? And you can start making more informed choices about how estrogen and progesterone are impacting your body.
So one of the things that we touched on when we first connected was taking supplements or taking external hormones or some of those things. And what I'd love to have you share is similar to the conversation we had, was just around maybe knocking down some of the myths out there around some of that. And again, back to that conversation I was having with my girlfriend a week ago. It's funny because she brought that up, that a friend of hers had gone and she was getting something. And I said, wait, I just had this conversation. Why did we think that this was not okay to do? And I think it goes back to the education is not out there and more conversations need to happen. But share your perspective on that stuff.
Yeah. Before I say anything else on this, I will say this again. Every woman is going to be impacted differently. And when you are making this decision, make sure that you are having conversations with people who are skilled, right? So it might be your physician. I will give clients research and information to take with them so that they can have a more informed conversation with their doctor. Because as we've said, in the medical fields, really good knowledge and understanding is inconsistent, I'm going to say at best. So these are decisions that you really want to be making in collaboration and conversation with people who have a good grounding in how your body works in particular, because it really is different for everyone. However, back to the generalized conversation, when we were in our, let's say, late teens, sort of early 20s, there was a study that came out, and I remember it really clearly because my grandmother had been on hormone replacement therapy. And this study came out, my mom found out about it, and she was like, Mom, you need to get off those right now. And so there was a study that came out in the mid to late 90s that indicated that there was an increased correlation in incidence of breast cancer if they were on HRT. The problem with that study is it was actually not a problem with the study. It was a problem with the way the data was reported by the media. And Dr. Peter Attia has a book called Outlive, and he's done a lot of research around this and followed up on those studies. And what they actually ended up finding was that more women ended up dying from broken hips because they didn't have the protective factors for their bone health and strength than ever did from increased rates of breast cancer.
Wow.
Right. So also that study came out in the mid to late 90s, which I hate to say it, is a long time ago now.
Yeah.
It's still, feels
like making us
history.
feel old, but
but it's not. It's like over 30 years. And so, although research and development still really is in its infancy in this area, there has been great strides. So, the any hormone replacement or hormone therapy now is very different. Like the drugs are not even the same as what they were using at that time. So, if you don't have any contraindicators, so there are some people who it's absolutely not an option, right? If you have had breast cancer and you are on estrogen blockers, this is something that is not an option for you. There's lots of other instances as well, which is why I said like this is a conversation you need to have with people who are really skilled and knowledgeable. However, if you don't have any of those contraindicators, meaning like problems or issues, it's worth a conversation if you feel comfortable because it can really have a long-term impacts. When I was doing some research, there's also some early research that is indicating that if you start HRT during perimenopause, it can have longer protective factors for your memory, which is another thing that people don't always connect with perimenopause and menopause. But your brain has receptors for estrogen in the part of your brain that is responsible for learning and memory. So when estrogen starts to decline, it's missing that connecting piece. So I've actually recently, it's come up quite a bit in folks that I've been having conversation with around like, I've been having a really hard time with word recall. I was like, it's entirely possible that it's a symptom of decreasing estrogen and perimenopause.
You guys, wait, I just want to pause there because I know, for me that hit home, but I know other people too. And again, back to the doctors. I also know the doctors. I'm thinking of a couple of women that I know, and they were sort of poo-pooed at the doctors. And there's nothing going on there. But, they were really, truly worried. Am I showing signs of early dementia? And it was back, I don't know, they're probably in their late 40s at the time.
Uh-huh.
And the reality is probably it had something to do with this phenomena, which is amazing to me that I had never even heard of. So I'm not sure if anybody else that's listening has heard of, but so interesting. So losing word recall can have to do with perimenopause or menopause.
Yes.
Wow.
It can. And so that is one of the things that you can take to a medical professional and say, this is some of what's being indicated here. If there's no risk factors for me, I would like to try it and see what happens. And like any medication, if you notice that suddenly your word recall, after a couple of weeks, once it has enough time to build up in your system, if you notice that your recall and memory are better, then it's a good sign that, it was your body's way of saying, hey, I need more estrogen to work well in this area. And, it's a complicated conversation for lots of reasons. We have all of these misunderstandings about it. I also had a conversation with a woman who said to me, well, but perimenopause and menopause is a natural process for a woman's body. So why would I put estrogen back in if it's going through this natural process? Which if that's your stance, I'm the last person who's going to tell you, no, you need to do this. Like I am really I'm just informing you so you can make choices that work for you. And our lifespans are longer now.
Much longer.
And evolution around menopause and perimenopause hasn't quite caught up to the length of our lifespan.
That's valid.
So if you think about, so I mentioned Dr. Peter Attia in his book Outlive earlier, and I love his work around health span. So he really looks at backward engineering. So let's say like on average, in my family, there's longevity. Like my grandma is still kicking it and she's 92. So let's say for like the last decade of my life, 82 to 92, what do I want that 10 years to look like? Right? I want to be able to move. I want to be able to have good memory. I want to be able to still have fun and enjoy life. I want to be able to engage in conversation. I still want to be able to do most of the things that I do now. If that's the case, then you have to start backward engineering to, well, what do I need to do now to make that possible for my last 10 years? And when perimenopause and menopause are starting at, I'm turning 47 this year. I've been in perimenopause for a couple of years now. That's a long time to go. So I personally am open to the idea of hormone replacement to protect my bone health, to protect my cardiovascular health, to protect my memory. And again, when the time comes for me where I feel like that's necessary, I will be working with medical professionals to make that decision.
I actually love that whole concept just in general, because I think having that vision of what you want that last span of your life to look like really does inform how you need to be living your life now. Because you're not going to just suddenly get healthy at 82 if you're not living a healthy lifestyle now, or get active, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? So it's a great generalized concept as well.
It absolutely is. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because in our conversation of HRT, sometimes it sounds like the miracle thing, and the pill is never the miracle, right? Like the medication is never the miracle. It's a tool. And at the same time, if you make that choice, it's still really important to engage in movement, in healthy nutrition, in sleep and stress management.
Yeah.
Because if those things aren't in place, then what happens is, like any medication, you're just going to need more and more and more and more for it to be
Yeah.
effective. And that's not the goal.
Right. Right.
Right. So when we have all of those other factors in place, it can be, then HRT can be a tool to help us, but we want those factors to be in place so that we're not having to get a higher and higher and higher dose every time, because then eventually it's just not going to be effective anyway. And one of the most effective at movement strategies is lifting weight and resistance.
I keep hearing this over and
I know.
over and over, no matter what conversation and what topic it is.
Yep.
It's like all the research is suddenly just popping, and everybody's realizing, forget the aerobics, forget the, yes, any kind of movement is good. Let's just
Mm-hmm.
say that generally.
Yes, absolutely.
But the weight or the strength training, it just seems to be blowing off the charts on how helpful it is, especially as we age.
Absolutely. And this, when I did my training, this fact actually really surprised me. But if you are in osteopenia, so that's the early stages or pre-stages of osteoporosis or osteoporosis, starting with light weightlifting can actually reverse osteoporosis and osteopenia because of the impact on your bones that's happening,
Wow.
right? So it's a more gentle impact that's happening than cardio, where you're like pounding.
Yeah.
But your muscles and tendons and bone all have to work together and hold tension. So it has a really healing effect, not only for your muscles and tendons, but for your bones and for your joints, because you're building up the tendons around your joints. So everything in the system becomes stronger.
Which also goes to why it's helpful for balance. They say it's super helpful for balance, right?
Absolutely.
And as we get older,
Yes.
you just quoted people dying of a break in the hips,
Mm-hmm.
falling, right? You're falling. So, yeah, so important. So important, guys. If you don't hear anything else, hear that.
Yeah.
Start strength training.
I know.
I hope you hear a lot of other things, but that just
Yeah.
keeps popping. So, I want to know, why do you think, in your opinion, now that you're living and breathing this all the time,
Mm-hmm.
why do you think nobody talks about it? Like, why do you think we grew up without hearing anything about it? And even now, it's not like the general topic between women. It's starting to get out there, but it's not really mainstream. Why?
Shame.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, that is the heart of everything. And on lots of different levels, right? So even when you think about when we were learning about our periods, it was like a lot of giggling, a lot of, and, even when I think about, we had a dinner party a couple of weeks ago, and very close family friends were over for dinner, and their daughter's around 11. And a friend was there who we hadn't seen for a while. And he was like, "So Lisa, like, what are you doing now?" And so I said, "Well, I'm a menopause coach and consultant." And my friend's daughter was like, "Lisa, what's menopause?" And it's like mostly a table of men. Like a table of men and my girlfriend and her daughter and me. And I said, well, menopause is what happens, like right now in school, you're learning about menstruation and what happens when you get your period. And immediately I see her start to shrink. Like she is physically trying to move away from this conversation. And I just, it's like, I see you're getting uncomfortable, but it's biology. Like this is science and it's really important to know. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to go. She didn't stay for the conversation. And it's not like that is a very usual response when we talk about anything around women and reproductive health, which is the most, this life that we live is so strange. But this absolute like shame around talking about how life is created is the
It's
most,
wild, right?
it is so wild. It is so absurd to me. But we hold, when we have our periods, we don't want anyone to know. If we have an accident, it's like the most embarrassing thing ever. We're constantly in this state of having to hide things. Like I even think about when I was teaching a grade 4 or 5 split. And it was when I was starting to have really heavy periods again, almost like I was a teenager. And I bled right through my pants. And I'm up in front of the class and I'm like, what am I going to do now? And I back out of the room and I like call a colleague. Hey, I need some help. Can you watch my class for a minute? I back out of the room, head to the washroom, do the best I can to clean everything up. I'm holding my pants underneath the hand dryer, thinking, good God, please don't let anyone else walk in here at this moment. But all of us as women have these stories of shame around something that just is.
Yeah, it's true.
And it is what creates life. So there's shame at the beginning of that. And then at the menopause phase, it's complicated by aging, right? It's marking that part in our lives where we're no longer fertile. And women's value in our society is really supported around the times when we're fertile. And so suddenly we are headed out of that phase and we are feeling redundant, right? Unseen, unheard, invisible. And so it makes it really hard to have these conversations when our value is wrapped up in all of these external things that tell us we're most valuable when we're fertile. And now we're getting old. The way I try to position it now is in this way. There are hard things about going through perimenopause and menopause. I am not going to deny that. There are things that are uncomfortable, but it is also a time of great liberation because we are free now of all of those expectations.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Right?
yes, yes. Yes.
And so that's the conversation I'm trying to bring forward is that, yes, there are hard things, but you also get to reconnect to like that girl who was prepubescent. Like, think about that girl who,
Yeah.
ran free and had skid knees and a dirty face and had that sense of freedom. And reconnecting with that energy and trying to pull that forward to now is a
Yes.
really beautiful process of reclamation of the identity of who you truly are. Because during these childbearing years, regardless of whether you have children or not,
We get
there,
lost. We get lost in
yeah,
the shuffle.
yeah, we do.
I couldn't agree more. I think we have that in common, right? That's my absolute favorite part about this age demographic is it's a time where we can, I say, unlearn, and a time where we can remember who we were,
Mm-hmm.
who we wanted to be,
Yeah,
all those things that got lost in the shuffle. So if we embrace that, I think it's can be a beautiful thing. It can be a
yeah,
beautiful thing. And fun.
absolutely.
Fun too.
Absolutely. And fun.
Yeah,
And that's one of the pieces that really does get lost, right?
absolutely.
Sense of joy and fun. This weird human ride that we're on is actually supposed to be fun.
Oh, right. It's supposed to be. Right.
Right?
Right.
There's
Yeah.
there's lots of hard things in this world. And I know that everyone is coming at it from different places of difficulty. And really, it is our soul's purpose to be joyful, right? Like when we look at, if we go out into the universe a little bit, the universe wants us to be abundant and joyful and enjoy the learning that we are having on this unusual planet. But reconnecting to that idea of like, oh yeah, what did I do that was fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And reframing it, right? It's one of the things that, I've been learning about and talking about a little bit is
Mhm.
just reframing what you thought it was. And fun isn't a destination or an event. It's finding the joy in the little things.
Mhm. Yeah,
Once you can do that, it really shifts things.
it really does. And I'm glad that you brought up the little things because that really is where the joy is found. Like my husband and I were having this conversation on the weekend because I went through a pretty significant transition. So I had been an educator for 20 years and I left that career because it was not so slowly destroying me. And on the weekend, my husband and I were talking, and he said, I feel badly that I didn't notice the toll it was taking on you. And that I don't want him to own that. I didn't even realize the toll it was taking on me. But some of the things that are telltale signs of that are how quiet I had become,
Mm,
how internal I had become. I loved to sing and to dance and to be silly and joyful in that way. And that's something that has just started coming out in me again. So from the outside, he is observing me coming back to life and seeing just how underground I had gone.
the difference. Yeah.
The,
I've
the
had a
difference.
similar experience. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Awesome though.
Yeah. Beautiful and powerful and healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
To let yourself jam out to your favorite song and get out your best and worst dance moves. And
And it's a process. It's a process, right? For anybody listening, it's a process. It's not like done. You just
no,
it's something that once you start on, you recognize and you can just keep moving forward in it. But it's really fun and enlightening part of for me this part of my life. So
yeah,
I'm enjoying that.
yeah. I completely agree. It's a great time to start thinking about what you really like and what you really want.
Yeah, and lean back into that. I
Mhm.
want to go back to so you hit on, starting a new career and going in this direction of being a consultant. And there's a piece of it that we didn't talk about and I didn't touch on in your bio, and it's about working with organizations.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so I know we wanted to touch on that because, again, a topic I don't think people realize how impactful this stage of life and the symptoms that sometimes come with it can be on people. And
Yes.
you're actually doing work with organizations to educate and create programs, etc. Talk to us a little bit about that work and why it's important.
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to be transparent in that I'm at the beginning of this work. And it is sort of the next frontier. I will say England is way ahead of us. So if you want to look for something that's a model, that's where we're turning our gaze to. And women's health, the policy that we put in place to support women's health actually supports all workers, right? So there's that. And in Canada, that's where I live, there was a report that came out in October from the Menopause Foundation of Canada that had some mind blowing data in it. Things like it's costing the Canadian economy $3.8 billion a year in unsupported menopause symptoms, be it through absenteeism, benefits that companies are paying out, all kinds of things. So there's that component of it. 1 in 10 women are leaving the workforce at their prime because of unsupported menopause symptoms. And a
Wow.
lot, yeah, it's a big one. And women between the ages of 45 and 60 are the largest growing population of our workforce. So if
Yes.
that's the largest growing population of our workforce and 1 in 10 of us are leaving at the prime, we have a serious issue happening. And I will speak to it very personally. So I had in the last decade of my career, I was a coach and provided professional development for other educators. I was involved in policy. I was involved in the leadership of the board and at the provincial level. And as I got closer and closer to the power source, I felt less and less seen. I felt less and less heard. And I lost my hope. I lost hope, and I lost the feeling that I could make a difference. And now looking back on it, knowing what I know, I also know that perimenopause played a role in that. Because when you are waking up and you're dealing with the emotional fluctuations that happen when you're, hitting your midlife, your kids are leaving home, every way that you have ever identified is starting to shift in your world, that takes up energetic space. And then chemicals start fluctuating in your body and they're impacting you in ways that you don't understand. And so your cup just is even more full before you hit your desk or wherever it is that you work. So you have less space to shift, moderate, change, do whatever you need to do during the day because your body is using up all of the energy that you would have had before for that kind of thing. It's why you hear women saying things like, I'm too old for this, or I just can't do this anymore. It's not that you're too old. It's just that we need spaces that understand and recognize that. So the process I work people through is one, like knowing and naming, how am I feeling? And what is the source of it? Like, where is this actually coming from? What do I need in my day? Then being able to communicate that in a compassionate way so that everybody understands. So for example, if I wake up in the morning and I have a wicked headache, which happens because of the fluctuations in hormones, then I can go in and I can say to the people I'm working with that day, hey, I have a really terrible headache today, probably because of this reason. It might show itself to you in these ways. If you notice it, can you please give me a little extra space and know that it's not this is not forever. This is just an impact that's happening to me for this day. And maybe even say, hey, Lisa, I can do that for you today. That would be really, really helpful. And then let's check in and see how things are tomorrow and how can I support you on a day where I have more to give. So if we have those communication strategies in place, it makes space for women to be able to stay in the workplace, as well as visioning for corporate leaders and organizational leaders so they understand how it's impacting their business, professional learning so everybody understands just what is happening and how to communicate, and policy that supports women's health, education, benefits, absenteeism policy that is kind instead of draconian, right? There are a lot of shifts and changes we can make that really foster keeping women in the workplace. And that is something that is important, not just to those of us who are having this experience, but, I refer to myself as I was an expensive asset to walk out the door. I had 20 years of experience. I had a ton of institutional knowledge because I worked in our system from kindergarten to grade 12. So I saw the whole thing. And the amount of professional development that had been poured into me to give me the skills I needed to do those jobs. And I took all of that and I left.
Yeah. Repeat, where if that's happening every way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great conversation to have in that even if it just formalizes or I guess socializes the idea for people, right? So that it's not I'm thinking back to your shame comment. So it can be a truly accepted reason for, needing a day off or not performing fully or whatever it is, right? And I would like to, part of my brain's going to I would like to hope that in today's day and age that, You don't necessarily have to say why you're out sick or why you have, but that's not the reality in some places. So your face. So, I mean, I think that the fact that we, try to promote more universal understanding and policy to support women makes sense to me.
Yes.
It will be interesting to see where this goes,
Yes.
in the coming years as it gets talked about more. I also think it ties back to your point about lifespan and work span as well. That's different these days.
Yes.
So all of those things are going to require different thought, different policy, different mechanisms for support.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at our systems that are in crisis, healthcare, education, government.
Yeah, they fall right into all of those buckets.
They do. And they are predominantly where women work because they are caregiving professions. So, well, government is much more male dominated.
And I don't know if I call it caregiving, but
no, it should be, right? Like the intention of government should be to care for the people. But in those places that are caregiving professions where women tend to work, they can't keep employees because we are burning out, and burnout is an entire part of this conversation, right? We're burning out because of unsupported perimenopause and menopause symptoms, right? It absolutely can be different. And we need to start creating workspaces that value the humanity of the people doing the work so that we don't burn out, so that we can stay in those roles and continue to grow and learn and lead and collaborate, right? Like cross-generational learning is really important. If there's no people who have been there for a while to collaborate with people who are new and coming on and do some like actual cross-generational learning, we're missing out on a huge component that is supportive of both, the people who are new in an organization and those who are leading.
Yeah, agreed. And I go back to that comment in general is really, it's a good comment in general, I guess, but it also ties to this conversation about menopause and perimenopause. In general, I just hope that we can continue to move in the direction where we have more supportive work environments and they're, for the people and they support life balance. But, I'm hopeful. So we'll see. I know that's not the reality everywhere for everyone, but I'd like to think that the shift that came out of the pandemic will have lasting effects in that space. I think it's a little bit of a swirl right now where people are trying to figure it out, but I'm hopeful.
Yes. Yeah, I am hopeful as well. Which is good because I'm in this space and it's the work that I try to do. So you want to have someone who's hopeful about that. But I do feel like it is a time where real shifts can happen that are supportive, yes, of women and women who are in this phase, but really it's good for everyone.
Yeah. So this has been phenomenal. Sharing all your insights been great. I guess I want to leave on a question that I like to ask people. Based on all this work that you're doing, what is one piece of advice you'd give to all of the women listening?
Oh, yeah. Listen, pay attention to your body. Let yourself drop in, right? So often our bodies are uncomfortable. And so we live in our brains and we just try not to feel.
Yes.
But when we do that, we miss out on the messages that are coming from our body. So actually, take some time to try to drop in gently and listen to what your body is telling you and know that it's truth. Your body is inherently wise. It is a genius system that we live inside of. So pay attention to it, listen to what it's telling you, and then trust it.
I love that. How many times have you heard a story about somebody that had some type of symptom but ignored it because, either they wanted to be in their head and not deal with it or they just blew it off. But to your point, your body has a way of just showing up when it needs to and giving you all the signals if you listen to them. Good one. Well, thank you again for talking with me today. I will put all your links in the show notes. Guys, remember to check Lisa out at Transforming 45 podcast, as well as her website and such, so you can see the work she's doing. But thank you again for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.